Citizenfour was the alias that Edward Snowden used to contact me in January 2013. And we corresponded over the course of 5 months, and when I didn't know who he was. And it was only actually days before traveling to Hong Kong that I actually had a name for the person I had been talking to.
But why did he choose Citizenfour? What does it mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I made a trip to Moscow not that long ago, where I filmed part of the end of the film, where he's with his longtime partner Lindsay Mills, and I asked him because because I didn't actually ever know what it was, and he said, "Well, I'm not the first person who's going to come forward and reveal information that the public should know, and I won't be the last." And so that's where it comes from.
One of the most striking things, Laura, about the film is that Snowden never appears to have considered the possibility of leaking anonymously. Were you struck by that?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually very shocked. I was contacted in January, and we had email correspondence for a long time, and for the first 3 months, I assumed he would remain an anonymous source. He wouldn't tell me any details about his, where he worked or where he lived, and I thought that I was talking to somebody. At some point, I'd receive documents, and then, he would disappear, and I would never know who the person was. And then in April, he revealed to me, he said, you should know that I actually intend to come forward and say that I'm the source of this information. And that he didn't want to hide, and he didn't want others to take responsibility, and that he didn't, if there was a leak investigation, et cetera. And so he told me that, and that's when I said, well, then if that's the case, then I would really like to meet you, and be able to film, and so that I could understand, your motivations. And his first response was that he didn't feel comfortable about that because he didn't want the story to be about him, which is something he also, you see, he echoes in the film when he's talking to Glenn in the very first interview. He says, "I'm not the story." And I said, well, it's people are going to, the media will make you the story, and that your motivations really do matter. And then he agreed, and that's how, sort of what led to the face-to-face meeting in Hong Kong.
Laura, how did he find you?
So as Glenn Greenwald has written in his book, he had received emails in December of 2012 asking to set up an encrypted way of talking, saying he had some information that he thought Glenn would be interested in, but he was very, very vague and didn't say anything specific. And Glenn he wasn't using encryption at that point, encrypted email. And so I then received an anonymous email in January, someone I didn't know, just asking me for my public key, and a public key is what's used for encryption. It's called PGP encryption. You have a key, you exchange keys, and then you're able to communicate securely. And so I had a key. I'd been using encryption for a while, so it was an easy thing for me to do. And I just said, here you go. Here's my key. And who are you, and what do you want? And then we started this correspondence. And the first, the following email was the one that you hear at the beginning of the film as we're moving through a tunnel, which he says, I'm a member of the intelligence community. This is not going to be a waste of your time. And he says, other details like, imagine your adversary is capable of 1 trillion guesses per second. And that was sort of the beginning of our correspondence in January.
Well, in fact, Snowden says to you, or writes, that you asked why I chose you. I didn't. You chose yourself, he says to you in one of your chats.
Right. So that was, so after the first email that I responded is like, okay, well, then why me? You need to help me understand this, because I was being a little bit cautious, not knowing there could be potentially, entrapment or something. And then he said, he referenced the fact that, that I had been, put on a watch list and stopped at the U.S. borders many times. So he had, I think, read about that. Glenn had written about the fact that I had been stopped at the border. I'd also published a short video about another NSA whistleblower, William Binney, on the New York Times website in August of 2012. And my guess is that he had seen both those things, and he knew that I was somebody who was working on NSA-related things, and he knew that also I had been targeted in some ways, so that I had I guess maybe a personal connection to the issue.
Well, Laura, Edward Snowden wrote, your victimization by the NSA system means that you're well aware of the threat that unrestricted secret abilities poses for democracies. This is a story that few but you can tell. You talked about being stopped at the border dozens and dozens of times. In fact, it's how you open Citizenfour. It's what you told us on Democracy Now! Before. Talk about those experiences. How many times have you been stopped crossing the border?
I think it's about 40 times, and it started in 2006, and it continued until 2012, and actually until Glenn wrote about it, and then they stopped detaining me and questioning me at the border. And, you know, in terms of what happens at the border, I mean, you know, I had made a film about the Iraq War, so I'd spent some time in the war zone. And it happened about a year and a half after finishing that film. And what I think what I don't think it is, I don't think the U.S. government is watching films and, you know, they're just some thought police that says we don't like this film and we're going to stop this person. But there is certainly, as we know, there is, you know, this growth of the intelligence community, which has created this sort of secret watch list process. And people get put on it. And then once you're put on it, there's actually no way to know why you're on it or how to get off of it. And so every time I would return to the United States, border agents would be sent to the plane, and I would be walked off into an area where I'd be questioned, and many different things happened. You know, each time was slightly different. Sometimes they would photocopy my notebook. Sometimes they would photocopy my credit cards. I had my computer confiscated once, my camera confiscated once, and you know, and they were asking questions about what I was doing. You know, why was I traveling the places I was traveling? And you know, when it first started, I was naive. I thought, well, this is just clearly a mistake. And I answered questions. I said, well, I'm a filmmaker. I was going to a film festival. I made a film about the Iraq War, thinking like, well, once I sort of explained all those things, that I would be taken off the watch list.
They got mad when you started taking notes about their questions.
And then things changed, and then I became a little bit more, okay, well, this doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, and then I started taking notes every time that I traveled, writing down the names of the agents, writing down the questions, the times that I was detained, and et cetera. And then they you know, weren't particularly happy about that, and it did escalate in 2012, when I was returning via Newark Airport, when I was taking notes, and they threatened to handcuff me for taking notes. And they made the argument that they thought that I was going to hurt them, physically hurt them with the pen, which, you know, was of course absurd. And then after that, I sort of went public. I hadn't made a secret of the fact that I was being stopped, but you know, the work that I do, I often, you know, I was going to places and trying to stay under the radar, and, you know, going public, you know, it's hard. You can't dial something like that back. So, but it was just so outrageous that, you know, that border agents were ordering me to not take notes, or they were going to handcuff me. It was so outrageous that I called Glenn, and he ended up doing an article about that for Salon.com.
Laura, that's part of the reason that you decided to take the material to Berlin that you got of Edward Snowden, and to do the editing there rather than here in the U.S.?
Right. Actually, it was before I was contacted by Snowden that I was, you know, I had been filming for a while, and I wanted to edit, and I just felt like that I couldn't assure that I was going to be able to keep my footage source material secure crossing the border. And I was at that point filming with several people who were all being targeted by the government, and that includes, you know, William Binney, the NSA whistleblower, Thomas Drake, another NSA whistleblower, Jacob Applebaum, who works with the Tor Project and has, you know, been training activists on, you know, counter surveillance, and also with Julian Assange. So I was filming with people that I knew that the government had an interest in, and I just felt like it wasn't safe for me to travel with the footage. So I had moved to Berlin to edit, and that's when I was actually in Berlin that I received the first email from Edward Snowden.